There are more questions this morning about the use of hydroxychloroquine as a potential treatment for COVID-19. One of the world's top medical journals retracted a study that had raised safety concerns about the medicine. With more on this, let's bring in Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He's a former FDA commissioner and a CNBC contributor. He also serves on the boards of Illumina and Pfizer. This is a British journal, Lancet. I think this is different than, was it different than the VA study, Scott?
Yeah, this is different than the VA study. And the group that was behind the data in this journal article also was behind the data in another article that also got retracted. So they're not making their data sources available. There's some questions with their data in terms of the purity of it, the consistency of it. They were collecting data from different countries, and people looked across the different data sets, and it just seemed too consistent. People raised a lot of questions about the underlying data in both of those studies. Which is unfortunate because this is a very closely watched question on whether or not hydroxychloroquine is providing a therapeutic benefit. One thing to remember, there's two data points that are worth noting about hydroxychloroquine. One is a study that came out that was a rigorous study in the last week that showed that it didn't provide a benefit when used prophylactically, used to prevent infection. And so people should probably be very cautious about using it in that regard. The other is that there's been a number of more rigorous studies that have taken what we call interim looks, where the data safety monitoring boards have taken a look at the accruing data, and they've allowed those studies to continue, which is a suggestion that if the drug was causing a lot of harm, they would have stopped those studies early, and they didn't. So they took that interim look when that Lancet study came out, and they allowed those studies to continue. So we'll eventually have a more definitive answer about whether it's providing a benefit as a treatment.
We ought to be able to figure out, like we did with remdesivir, which was not a huge beneficial effect once you really looked at it. It was enough to hit a statistical endpoint, but you've always said that it's not going to be a home run. But why can't we figure out whether there's any benefit at all to hydroxychloroquine? I mean, it helps to know maybe that it's not really, if it's not as dangerous as it was portrayed, that would help to know. But you don't want to take it if it's not helping. If it doesn't, doing absolutely nothing, there's no reason. Do no harm isn't that the Hippocratic? That's a bad. Hippocratic sounds like hypocrite. So I think you guys need to change that. Get it some other guy to emulate.
We'll know soon. I mean, the more rigorous studies that are underway are going to read out. It's slowed down. Accruing the data is slowed down because the infection rate has slowed down. So the remdesivir trials were done earlier in the course of the epidemic, so it was easier to come to completion on those studies. But we'll have a readout soon. This month we should have a readout on these hydroxychloroquine studies. The reality is that it's probably not producing a robust treatment effect if it's producing a treatment effect at all, because if it was, you would have seen the signal earlier. And in fact, a lot of doctors have pulled away from prescribing it for that reason. And the recommendation right now is you really shouldn't be using it outside of a clinical trial.
So, Scott, we speak to you a lot. Since the last time we spoke, are you seeing troubling signs about all these people that are out and whether we're seeing spikes among people that attended a lot of the demonstrations or protests? Is it happening? It's been about a week, hasn't it? Or even over that. So we should be seeing it. If it's
it's still a little early.
Still a little early?
It's still a little early to see the impact. You probably want to wait 2 weeks and a couple of replication cycles, or maybe 3 replication cycles before you start to see it. Because a lot of these cases, as we know, are asymptomatic. It's a younger crowd, more likely to have asymptomatic illness. So if it starts chains of transmission, it's going to take time for those chains to grow into the kinds of numbers where you could detect it. A good website to look at is rt.live. It's actually started by the former founders of Instagram. And they take in data from the different states and try to model what the reproduction rate is of the different states. And right now they show about 12 states where they have an expanding epidemic, which is pretty consistent with the other models that are out there right now in terms of the number of states where you see cases growing: Arizona, Arkansas, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Texas, Florida, Montana, Alaska. So they list out about 12 states right now where the infection is expanding. At the bottom of the list, in terms of where it's contracting, is actually Vermont, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So the states that took the toughest actions right now have come down the curve the fastest.
Well, Scott, it just seems like if it's a lot, it is a lot of young people. So maybe there are a lot of them are asymptomatic or or the symptoms aren't as serious, wouldn't it take another week to see whether they've given it to more people that might be in a more vulnerable demo?
That's right. I mean, that's what I was suggesting. So if you think that there were chains of transmission that were lit in those crowds, it's going to take a few weeks before people who have a higher asymptomatic rate go on to spread it into the kinds of numbers that you can actually detect an uptick. There will be cases coming out of this. No question about it. Whether or not we see an epidemic in these states, that's harder to tell.
Scott, there was